it's almost dinner time in my household, and I think I'm going to make a favorite, something that I'm sure a lot of us have been missing if we like to take trips to Ikea. I'm gonna make Swedish meatballs and fries with lingonberries because boy am I missing my Swedish meatballs. So you see in front of you almost everything I'm going to need to make the Swedish meatballs and the sauce that goes with them. The other kind of cool thing I'm gonna do with this recipe is I actually have some items in my kitchen that I really need to use up, and I think that they're gonna make really good additions to this recipe, and so I'm gonna be messing with the recipe a little bit, but in the comments of, or excuse me, in the description of this video, I'll make sure to put the original recipe that I used. So first things first, I'm gonna clean up my workstation, and then we're gonna start by forming our meatballs. So we're gonna start, as I said, with our meatballs. I've gotten a little bit of extra space here, and one thing about meatballs that is always included, well, two things really, is breadcrumbs and eggs. So I need about 1/3 of a cup of my little itty bitty breadcrumbs. I also need 1/2 cup of milk, and I'm gonna not be using regular milk. I'm gonna use some of my leftover buttermilk, which I think will add a really interesting flavor to my meatballs. It's a really thick, creamy, slightly sour milk. Not bad, not like rotten, but a little bit sour. I'm also gonna add 1 egg to my mixture. I'm going to add 2 cloves of fresh garlic right on in there. And I'm going to add some of my spices, not all of them. I'm going to add my salt. I'm going to add some black pepper. I'm going to add some rosemary, which is not technically in the original Swedish recipe. I just really like it. And then finally, I'm going to add a little bit of nutmeg. And then I'm going to grab myself a fork and I'm going to mix that around, and I need it to sit for 10 minutes so that the breadcrumbs can absorb some of the milk. Our breadcrumb mixture has now sat for its 10 minutes, so we're going to add the last 3 ingredients. The ground meat. The original recipe calls for ground beef. I happen to have ground chicken laying around, so I'm going to use ground chicken today, and I'll put that in last because it's going to get my fingers all chickeny. I need to add my onion, which is very small pieces. I chopped it extra today because otherwise you're going to get big old chunks of onion in your meatballs. We need some parsley. Normally we need fresh parsley, but I don't have fresh parsley. I definitely have dried parsley, so we'll sprinkle some of that in there. And then finally, a little bit of a secret ingredient for me is Worcestershire sauce. It tastes absolutely fantastic in meatballs. I'm probably adding about a 1/2 teaspoon. And now is where we get to mix all of our ground chicken into our breadcrumbs and spices and milk and make them into delicious meatballs. Ground chicken is really sticky. And so you just keep on mixing. Don't worry about it getting all over your hands because it won't be an issue later. I'm just waiting now for my oil and my butter to heat up in my heated pan here. This is my frying pan that I'm going to use to cook my meatballs. And here we have the meat ready for my meatballs. Because it's made out of ground chicken, it's really sticky, so I'm going to be putting a little bit of cold oil on my hands, and I'm going to form the meatballs as I put them into the frying pan. That nice crackling sound tells me that we're about ready. So I'm going to make a whole big mess of myself again and start getting some meatballs into my pan. We've got all of our meatballs in the pan. Feel free to scoot them around a little bit. If you're using ground chicken like me, you've got to be extra careful because the meat is very sticky and it will stick to your utensils and the meatballs will stick to each other, so you can just move them apart a little bit. And we're going to let these cook on all the sides that we can until they're nice and brown. And we also want them to be very cooked all the way through the middle. It is 100% okay if the meatballs don't stay perfectly round. They're in a frying pan. It's going to happen. But these are looking really beautiful so far. These are just about finished, and I have gone ahead and preheated my oven to a low temperature, about 75 degrees Celsius. When I take these out of the pan, I'll put them in the oven to keep them warm. And then we're going to make our meatball sauce right here in this pan. I went ahead and reduced the temperature of my frying pan, and I'm going to take my meatballs out. Now I'm going to remove this frying pan from the heat just for a minute or two, because if I put butter in there now, that butter is going to brown and it's going to burn really badly. So we're going to come back in just a second and start our gravy. Alright, I just needed to give that pan a second to cool down and for the burner to cool down a little bit. It's time for us to make our gravy for our meatballs. Now, I could do this the easy way, because guess who makes a packet that is literally their gravy sauce and you add milk? That'd be them. That'd be Ikea. But we're not going to do it that way. We're going to make our own. So the first thing that we start with is butter. A lot of butter. A surprisingly large amount of butter. But we do. Butter. We're going to let that melt. And while that's melting, you need to make sure you've got a whisk. You need to make sure you've got one of these. Very, very important for making this sauce. You can see our butter's almost melted. Now what I'm going to do is actually, this is a way that lots of sauces are made. In French cooking, it's called a roux. We're just going to mix some flour with our butter and we're going to cook it. And that flour is going to make all of our liquids get thicker and thicker and thicker as we add more stuff to this sauce. It's very important to stir it all the way into the butter and make it smooth, or else you're going to have a lumpy sauce, and nobody wants that. Now it's going to turn this brown color because we've had other brown stuff in here already. Now we're going to slowly add some beef broth that I've made with a beef bouillon cube and a cup of hot water. Slowly, because if you don't, you're going to have a lumpy sauce. Make sure you stir all the time. Got a little bouillon stuck in there. Now we're going to add milk to this sauce. The original recipe wants me to have something thicker though, like heavy cream. Not a problem. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add some of my non-fat milk, and then I'm going to add some sour cream, which is really thick, and hopefully it's going to make up for my lack of cream in the house. Just like with my beef stock, I'm going to start slow and mix it in really well. That should be the last of my milk. And then I'm going to add some sour cream. I won't need to add too much. I'm looking at about a big heaping spoonful. And then last, but certainly not least, I'm going to add some mustard. And I'm going to make sure it tastes awesome by adding salt and pepper. I have my special delicious German mustard right there. And that's our gravy done. We can go ahead and turn off our burner and set this aside and wait for our fries to be finished, and then I think it's time to eat. It's dinner time. We're going to serve this up just like Ikea does. I think 10 meatballs should start somebody off really nicely. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There's a big grown-up size portion. And today I have decided to make curly fries. And of course, if you're a true Ikea fan, you simply can't do without the lingonberries. Enjoy!